How is AI really affecting software engineering and the developer's experience? Today on the Product Driven podcast, we're talking to Laura Tacho, who works at DX, who's one of the industry-leading providers and thought leaders around developer experience. She's going to tell us about her industry experience and research with AI and what's really going on. Check out today's episode of Product Driven. To survive and thrive, you must adopt a product-driven mindset. And we're back for another episode of Product Driven. This is your host, Matt Watson. Very excited to be joined today by a very special guest. The CTO of DX, Laura Tacho, is here. They're in the forefront of developer experience. You'll see lots of industry research from them about these topics, about developer productivity, developer experience. So we're going to have a fun conversation today. Laura, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, big fan. And looking forward to whatever we're going to get into today.
Well, I think when you talk about developer productivity and AI, is AI living up to the hype? Like, I know you're doing a lot of research on that right now. Mm-hmm. I guess, why don't you first tell us, for maybe those who aren't as familiar, like, what does developer experience even mean? Like, what does that mean?
A very important question because I think developer experience has a bit of a marketing problem. When we think about developer experience, if you haven't been a developer before, you're not sort of in that world, we might think about like ping pong and beer kinds of things, like developer experience. But what developer experience actually is creating software development processes and tools that lack friction. So developer experience is the lack of friction in the development environment. So this is not nap pods and beer, but this is allowing developers to get their work done efficiently, because on average, developers waste 20% of their time every week due to inefficiencies, bad process, poor tooling. And that is a huge problem. So developer experience isn't just, about coddling developers. I do think it has a bit of a marketing problem.
But most of that problem is really organizational friction, right? Like, it's not even developer team friction. It's friction by all the rest of the company and all the dumb things all the rest of the company does.
I mean, that's definitely part of it. When we look at developer experience, we're looking at not just time in editor, hands-on keyboard time. We need to look at things like requirements gathering, priority shifting, focus time, those kinds of things, meeting heavy days. Those are really impacted by the organizational context. And funny that you mentioned the organizational piece, because I'm sure you and your audience have heard this like 10x developer phrase, and like certain people are 10x developers and certain people are, I don't know, not 10x developers. But where that actually comes from is like a study on organizations. What they did was the coding games, which was like from 1986, I think, realized that the disparity between good and bad organization-wide was about 11x, which is where that 10x developer kind of thing came in. And so within an organization, there's actually not that much variance, but certain organizations are doing way better than others for all those reasons that we just talked about, these kind of organizational problems that cause friction in development.
So traditionally, let's say before AI was a thing over the last couple of years, so go back a couple of years ago, when you think about developer experience and removing friction, what were the key things that teams struggled with that your guys' research and your guys' products and tools would help people with? Like, what were the key problems that they tend to have?
Yeah, what's really funny is that it's the same things that they're struggling with today. Like, AI has actually, in fact, I would say not solved, but made it worse. And we can get into that because the companies that are doing well with AI are the ones that already invested in solving these existential developer experience problems. So let's talk about that later. But to kind of answer your question very directly, what are organizations struggling with or developers struggling with when it comes to developer experience? The biggest problems overall, build and test. So having reliable CI pipelines that run quickly, short feedback loops, basically, from people, also from machines, so from your CI systems. That's a big one. Documentation is still globally the lowest rated driver of developer experience across the board, from companies all the way from like the Fortune 10 to a startup that was founded 2 weeks ago, I'm convinced. It's not just that documentation isn't complete, it's that developers are wasting 30 minutes plus a day because they can't find the answers to things that they need because it's not well documented. Local development experience is also another one. So being able to get fast feedback in your local development environment, things like updating things in the browser, those kinds of things. So it kind of comes back down to feedback loops, making sure those are really quick, cognitive load, keeping a smaller amount of things in your brain in order to complete a task, and then having time for focused work.
In my book, Product Driven, the Product Driven model has 5 different pieces to it, but I describe clarity as the fuel that drives teams. And the reason I call it clarity is I feel like developers can easily get stuck at every turn, right? Like, how do I do this thing? I need this feedback. I need to make this decision. How do we architect this? Is this thing in scope? Are we doing this? Are we not doing this? And a lot of things you describe all kind of fall back to that, right? It's like, I need to test this. I need to know if it works. I need to deploy it. I need to know if it works. Like, you can get stuck very easily at every single turn along the way if you don't have clarity in what you're trying to do. You just get stuck. You wait till the next meeting. You have to wait for somebody else. You jack around all day potentially and wait for stand-up tomorrow or whatever to ask the question. It's so important for developers to have that clarity so they can just keep going. They can just keep moving. And they don't get stuck at every turn.
Yeah, we have the measure that we use for developer experience to measure it in an organization is called the Developer Experience Index. And this is a research-backed metric that comes from 14 drivers of developer experience that were derived from, there's a paper that was published by Abhi Noda, Dr. Michaela Greiler, and some others, as well as the DevX framework, which is a paper that Abhi worked on, who's the co-founder and CEO of DX with Dr. Nicole Forsgren and some other researchers as well. When you look at those drivers and would classify them, which ones relate to clarity, to your point, it's over half of them, I would say, are directly related to clarity hands off the keyboard. It's not related to necessarily the coding task, but figuring out like incremental delivery, decision-making, customer focus. Those are drivers of developer experience, and they must be in place in order for your developers to operate efficiently. It's not just about how quickly they can get, words, characters into an editor. It's very much a overarching process that needs those product and organizational factors to be in place as well in order for them to develop software effectively and quickly.
It all has to drive the what and why, right? It's like, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And it should be their job to hopefully figure out how.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Unless they're in a company that has to be spoon-fed the how. But ideally, the engineering team should be to figure out the how, but they've got to know the what and the why.
Yeah, exactly. I think one mistake that I made earlier in my career, when I had first gotten into leadership, was I was trying to do a lot of shit shielding and trying to protect, quote unquote, my developers from those kind of business conversations or product conversations. I realized very quickly that this was a drastic disservice that I was doing to them, because what I was doing was depriving them of the important context and knowledge that they needed in order to be able to do their job. Even if they didn't know that was what I was doing. I had certainly good intentions, and there are obviously a lot of developers out there who went into software development because they didn't want to have to deal with things outside of a code editor or even deal with UIs or customers. Unfortunately, that limited skill set just doesn't make someone very competitive or high performing,
Well,
at least on the
AI.
teams I build. Yeah, absolutely.
AI.
Yeah.
If you look at it, something like no code, even back to managing Salesforce or Microsoft Access or any of these no code type products, you've got to be very business focused, because you have to understand how to solve the business problem, and it's not as much engineering. And then of course on the full stack kind of engineering, it's heads down, can be very deep, complicated engineering. In the middle you have low code that's kind of a mix of the two, right? Like, I have to understand the business part of it. I don't write as much code, but I have to understand some coding. But I think that's where everything's going, right? Like, AI is kind of going to force everybody to be in that middle where it's a little more like low coding. But that makes it hard, right? Because you have to understand the business context more, but you have to understand what the code does, because you have to be smarter than the AI. Because let's be honest, AI can do a lot of dumb things. You have to be smarter than the AI and smart enough to look at the output of it to know if it works. If anything, I feel like this job is getting more and more difficult.
Yeah, I don't think AI reduces complexity. I'll just say that. It adds a lot of complexity, and I think a lot of leaders are feeling that squeeze right now. A lot of individual developers also feel that squeeze. There's sort of pressure coming from all around. Um, I think that AI is doing a couple things, as you said. It's making a low code universe the one that we live in. Like, we don't write assembly code anymore. We write things in higher order languages. Like maybe I write in
JavaScript
Ruby
now.
or Python, and now I can write things in English. And maybe we should think about that,
Yeah.
as this is a way. But I think it's also, AI has expanded the definition of like who can use code to solve business problems. And I see a lot of companies expanding and giving access to these tools to not just people with developer in their title because they recognize the value of giving, designers or product managers the ability to prototype quickly and have that become part of the muscle when it comes to validating an idea.
But that's also like giving the intern full access to go write code for the production system.
Oh, not production though. And that's one other thing I want to get in is that we're seeing a bifurcation in the industry right now when it comes to durable code, which is customer facing production grade code and disposable code. And
Yeah.
Charity Majors from Honeycomb wrote a really thoughtful piece on this just a couple weeks ago. But durable code is always going to come with the challenges, and I think we get in trouble when we use AI to write disposable code but misinterpret it as durable code, which is where, as you said, AI can do a lot of dumb things. It's totally fine when I'm writing a prototype that's running locally on my machine, or I put it in a Docker file and ship it off to someone on my team to say, hey, what do you think about this? That's really different, as you said, from giving an intern production access and allowing them to like force push to main and that being deployed on a Friday afternoon. Like, there's got to be some sensible checks here, and we can't confuse disposable code with durable code because that is not going to end well for anybody, especially your customers.
Well, at Full Scale Ventures, we have a couple AI startups we're building internally, and we have the same conundrum. It's like our product manager is using tools like V0 and things like that to rapidly prototype things, but then we basically throw all the code away. And my recent challenge to him has been, well, how do you work within our normal code base to do the same prototyping, but like it actually be usable?
Yeah.
And it's trying to find that balance of, right? Like instead of just disposing of all the code, how much of it can we actually reuse? But the rest of the engineering team can thoroughly review all of it. Of course, I don't want to ship it straight to production, but and this is not an large scale enterprise product either. This is kind of a SaaS early stage thing. So like we want to go very quickly, and we're okay with a little more risk of that moving very quickly part of it. But yeah, it's just trying to strike the balance of all that is very difficult. And then you have a product manager who is not a software engineer in any form, potentially generating code to check in and doesn't understand things like source control or database schema or all these other things.
What we found, so DX has incredibly rich data from 500 plus companies that are trying to answer those exact questions right now. And so part of my job, which makes it very interesting, is like I can look at all of this data in aggregate and look at patterns. And we do have different attributes on contributors. So we can look at junior versus senior and, different attributes on them. One thing that we've noticed recently is that junior engineers are producing more code. They're getting a lot of it, but senior engineers in a lot of companies are the ones kind of cleaning up the mess. So we're not necessarily saving time or reducing effort. We're just sometimes shifting effort down the SDLC. And as you said, like you would want maybe that prototype work not to go to waste and to actually check it in and ship it to production, but somebody still has to take time to review it. And then you have to think about, well, would it have been faster to just have the engineer who knows how to code and know how the systems work use AI to produce that artifact and then check it, ship it, versus trying to clean up, Claude plus someone who doesn't know how to code and then getting that into production? It's a hard question.
The other thing I've seen, and I'm sure a lot of other companies are struggling with this, is now my product manager is wasting a lot of time prototyping all these things in, V0 or Replit or all these different tools, trying to make this perfect, beautiful, cool prototype, when he could have just told the engineer, like, hey, go make this screen with these 3 columns and make it do this thing, and that's all you needed to know, go. Now he's like, no, I spent 3 days trying to make this beautiful, perfect prototype thing. It's like, we didn't even need all of this. Like, the
Yeah.
engineers are smart enough to do their job. Just tell them what you need. You didn't need to like go to this nth degree of building a prototype of something. But now they can do it. They're doing it.
It's fun though.
It's fun.
That's another thing. It's fun.
I like playing with the tool.
It is really fun. And I mean, there needs to be in every organization some amount of time for experimentation to gain fluency with the tool, to understand the boundaries of it. But to your point, I'm seeing companies that have these long backlogs of stuff that they have not gotten to. And now they look at AI and think, oh, amazing. We get to do all this stuff now. Maybe there's a reason you didn't get to it, like maybe just because you should doesn't mean, or just because you can doesn't mean that you should. And I think that, using these tools in the right bounds and making the footprint on your org the right size and shape is still a problem, just like any other tool that organizations are going to have to grapple with. Like, is it useful to your business to have a PM prototype when it takes that much time, when actually a Google Doc probably would have been okay? It's just more fun right now to learn the tool.
Everybody loves playing with the tools. That's the problem I have with my product manager. I love him, but he loves to play with all the tools. He has all these different tools, playing with all the tools. Dive deeper into how you think AI is affecting software engineering. Clearly DX is at the forefront of developer experience. You're doing a lot of research. DX does a lot of research. You guys work with lots of Fortune 500 companies and all this stuff. How do you actually see AI impacting engineering, and how do you guys think it will impact engineering if you have a crystal ball?
Yeah, I mean, a very difficult question to answer that a lot of companies have been trying to answer for the last 2 years.
You don't have the answer?
I do have the answer. Well, not really, kind of. I think like a lot of it is, a lot of the very well-grounded opinions that we have about developer productivity come from decades of studying how software teams work. But AI has only been used by software organizations for like maybe 18 months or 2 years on the maximum end, and like usually less than 6 months. And so we just don't have a lot of longitudinal data. Also, at the same time, the ecosystem is like, the tools are just leapfrogging each other week by week. And so we have not only kind of an unstable, chaotic tool ecosystem, we have a lot of these like paradigms and working patterns that are brand new. And so doing research on this is like, we're kind of all learning together. But what we can say, because we have breadth and we have scope across the industry, when organizations look to measure the impact, there's 3 dimensions that are really important to look at. First is adoption, utilization. We want to see the penetration of these AI tools into your organization. How many developers are using them? How much code is actually making it to production that's authored by AI? Because that makes a big difference in terms of robustness that you need in terms of your pipelines, your SRE practices, or other things. So we want to look at that. We also need to look at things like time savings. We need to look at developer experience. We need to look at quality, time to market, innovation rate, those things. And then the very last thing, which usually comes last, is looking at cost. And I don't mean this in total like cost optimization, but just, there has to be ROI there. It has to be worth what you're at least paying for the tools, and they're not getting any cheaper. We have to make decisions about, we're doing consumption-based, there's consumption-based pricing. How much do I make available to my developers? Which developers get a bigger bucket of money to spend? Which developers get a smaller bucket? Who gets a license? Who doesn't get a license? So looking across those like utilization, impact, and then getting to cost is, we found at lots of companies like Dropbox uses that, Booking.com uses that model, for example. That's helped them define their strategy. Most importantly, identify when things are going a little bit sideways so they can correct and get back on track to what they're trying to do business-wise.
So I never heard in there that all software engineering is done, and my 16-year-old shouldn't be a software engineer. I never heard that.
There's a lot of sensational claims out there. I blame ad-supported media for these sensational claims. I think like, did we say the same thing when CI/CD became a thing? Like, no, we had like, okay, Jenkins does automate a lot of the work that people do, but now we have teams that have to manage Jenkins. That's kind of a classic example that I use. I don't think under any circumstances that software engineering is, as a profession, going away. These are tools that accelerate productivity and can accelerate business impact, but it's a tool like any other tool. I think there are going to be some changes in hiring patterns, most likely, in the next year or two. But as you said, I think before we started recording, I think there's a lot of companies that are still trying to figure this out, and we're trying to figure out what it means long term. There's a lot of open questions right now, and it's in some ways hard to predict.
Like everything, the answer is always it depends. That's the answer to literally everything in IT, right? I think for sure we know it's re-scrambling all the roles and who can do what. And there's no doubt that software engineers that are very product savvy, very business savvy, that understand how to use AI tools are the clear, real 10x developers of the future. Because there's no organizational friction, no dev team friction. Potentially it's them. Potentially it's one or two people moving at breakneck speed because they just understand what needs to be done and they know how to use AI and they can just move.
Yeah.
Right? Where every big company is always overwhelmed with just friction, risk avoidance, making decisions, like all this kind of stuff. Really, really tiny teams that really, really understand product are just going to run circles around everybody else.
Yeah, I think that AI is definitely reshaping the boundaries of the software development or software engineer role and what skills are going to set people on a higher growth trajectory. There, as you said, software engineering is not going away. We're not going to be able to not have software developers, at least right now. We're not that far with the technology yet. Someone I mentioned, or I think it's been covered a few, but like now with AI, we can have a one-person billion-dollar startup.
Yeah.
And I think I don't think we're there, but I don't think we're that I actually don't think that we're that far away. I think there's a tremendous amount of pace, urgency of business problems to solve that one individual person could build. I think there's a big difference between building something and then supporting it. And there's a big difference between getting someone to buy your product once and getting someone to buy your product year after year. And that requires a lot more than just, one person with an AI license. But I do think there's something to be said. Like I would encourage anyone listening who's like, maybe this is your sign. Like, I don't think it's unreasonable for one person to build an app that could bring in $1 million of revenue a year. I don't think that's totally outrageous. Maybe not 1 billion, but 1 million? Probably.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
The problem is most software engineers never get the opportunity or the experience to be that close to the business problems and the product and the customer to
You're absolutely right.
really do that. And that's part of what my book is about product driven, is about how we need our teams to have more of that focus, have more connection to the customers and the product and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of big companies, they just don't. And the bigger of a company you get, the smaller your role gets, right? It's like now your job is to optimize the performance of this thing, improve stability of this thing or whatever. Like nobody knows why this thing even exists, but your job is to improve this thing, right?
Yeah.
Like you're just like a cog in a machine somewhere, at Facebook or some big company like this, right? Like this company's been around forever. Your job is just to keep this thing running and improve it. And like you're so far divorced from why your code matters to the end user.
Yeah, it's really tricky when I talk to executives about hiring, and they often use, as you said, like Meta or Uber or Google as like a cheat code fast track of like, oh, this person could pass their hiring process, so obviously they're good. I always encourage them to look at what's the scope of influence that this person had at their previous role, because bringing in someone who was an engineering manager at Meta to be your VP of engineering, certainly there's candidates who can do that really well. But you have to look at what was their scope of influence. They're not making organization-wide decisions on how to run a business like you want your VP of engineering to do. And I've seen time and time again, startups specifically make that mistake and then just have a revolving door of, hires that come in, seem good on paper, can perform really well in a particular environment, but then just can't get traction in their new role because the scope is much broader than they were performing at in their last role.
If you work in IT or software engineering and you're listening right now and you don't think the customer matters, go start your own startup and you'll learn like the next day how important the customer is.
I can attest to that. So I was a VP of engineering, and during the pandemic, I decided to build up my executive coaching practice. So I quit my like corporate job and then started my own business. I know pandemic was like maybe not the, the best choice, but it worked out. Overnight, I went from having scope just in, engineering product data to like all of a sudden I needed to be really good at sales. All of a sudden I needed to be good at marketing. All of a sudden I needed to do ops stuff. Like there were a lot of things that I learned very quickly that I didn't know very much about and had to seek outside experts. But now I'm so glad that I did that and had that experience because
it's the only way to grow.
It's the only way to grow. And that's, thinking back to times in my career when I've tried to like shield my team from those business conversations or, not wanting to take their time up with a customer meeting because you have more important things to work on. I don't want to disturb your schedule. Like, no, those are actually some of the most high value things that they could be doing because it's helping. They have to synthesize and draw those brain connections of like, what are we actually doing here? Like why there's a word in German called it's mitdenken. Like we have to like think with this thing. It's not just, I have these requirements. Okay, I'm going to build the requirements, but like, let's think through this and figure out how we're actually going to solve the problem. And does this do it sufficiently? And if I feel like something's not right, even though it's not written down in the spec, I need to speak up because that's what I'm being paid for is not to code, it's to solve this business problem.
Well, I really appreciate having you on the show today. I feel like I could talk to you all day long about this stuff. Is there any, as we wrap up the show today, is there anything else that that we should know, or you got any great other stories or industry research, like end of days for software engineers, anything else that you want to drop on us? Maybe
a little bit of reassurance to those leaders who are listening to this and have seen headlines about, 30% of our code's being written by AI, or like, we're not hiring junior engineers anymore, we don't need them. I can say, like myself, the peers that I work with who have access to industry data about how real companies are using AI, we have not been able to substantiate any of those claims with the data that we see. They are sensationalized for headlines to get views. Realistically, what's happening is that engineers are saving about 3 hours, 45 minutes a week. That is the median time savings across the industry. Study of 88,000 developers, or 88,000 developers. Sorry, not 88, 38,880 developers. So very like significant sample size, about 4 hours. This is what Google also reported in their latest article. What's very interesting is what we're seeing is that companies who apply AI to those more organizational problems, those product problems, requirements, aggregating feedback, they're seeing a better lift. So I don't think that AI is here to take away engineering jobs necessarily, because there's a limit. Like writing code is such a narrow piece of, first of all, what a software engineer does in a day, but also about developing software in general. Writing code is just a part of it. AI is not coming.
The what and the why.
It's still about the what and the why. And I think my hope for the next 12 months about AI it's going to be adding more AI sprinkles to the what and the why and getting more clarity for engineers. I think that is the biggest way that we can accelerate time to market, is to use these tools, not just for the code authoring, but outside in other areas of the SDLC. And I think that benefits everyone.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate having you on the show today. If people want to learn more about you or DX, where should they go?
Yeah, come find me on LinkedIn, Laura Tacho. I think I'm the only one. LauraTacho.com is where I have some blog posts. I also teach a course on measuring AI impact, on developer productivity metrics, just getting a really foundational understanding of how to think about this problem. And then getdx.com is where you can find the research and white papers that we're putting out on AI impact and lots of other things.
All right, Laura, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks for tuning into Product Driven today. If you're passionate about building user-centric tech products, join over 30,000 tech leaders who receive the Product Driven newsletter directly in their inbox every week. Visit fullscaleteam.com/newsletter to sign up today for our newsletter. You can also view all of our episodes on YouTube and join over 50,000 others. And please follow me, Matt Watson, on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.